The black sedan rolled through the iron gates far earlier than it ever had before, its tires crunching softly against the immaculate gravel driveway. Ethan Vale sat in the back seat, fingers loosely clasped, eyes fixed on the familiar curve of his luxury home as it emerged from behind the tall hedges. The meeting in the city had ended abruptly, an acquisition delayed, lawyers sent scrambling, and for once, there was nothing left on his calendar. No dinners, no events, no carefully arranged hours meant to keep him away from a house that functioned more like a museum than a place to live. The driver stopped in front of the entrance. Ethan stepped out, the cold evening air brushing against his face, sharper than he expected. The mansion loomed in its usual way, flawless stone, tall glass windows reflecting the fading orange sky, every light inside glowing with perfect symmetry. It was the kind of home people admired from a distance, the kind that appeared in magazines. Ethan had bought it because it was impressive, not because it was warm. As he approached the front doors, something subtle caught his attention. The lights inside were brighter than usual. Not just on, but alive, casting shifting shadows against the curtains. He paused, keys in hand, his instincts prickling. The staff had been dismissed for the evening. He remembered it clearly. He always did. Order mattered. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first, everything seemed normal. The faint scent of polished wood and citrus cleaner hung in the air. His footsteps echoed across the marble floor, crisp and solitary, just as they always did. He removed his coat and draped it over the chair by the entrance, listening. Then he heard it, a sound that did not belong. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, soft laughter, light and unrestrained, bouncing gently through the cavernous space. Ethan stiffened, his heart rate picked up, mind immediately calculating possibilities. Had the security system malfunctioned? Had someone broken in? He stood still, barely breathing, as the sound came again, clearer this time. A child's voice. Then another. Children. Ethan frowned. The word alone felt foreign inside these walls. He moved cautiously, his polished shoes now silent against the floor as he followed the noise. It drifted from deeper within the house, toward the living room, the largest one, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture chosen by designers who had never met him. As he walked, details he normally ignored jumped out at him. A small jacket lay draped over the banister of the staircase. A pair of worn sneakers sat neatly beside an antique vase, their laces knotted together. They looked painfully out of place. His unease grew. He stopped just short of the living room entrance, pressing himself against the wall. From there, he could see without being seen. The sight before him rooted him to the spot. The massive living room, usually pristine and untouched, had been transformed. Children were everywhere. They sat cross-legged on the floor, leaned against couches, clustered near the windows. Their laughter filled the space, warm and uncontrolled, echoing off the high ceilings. A long roll of paper had been spread across one of the rugs, one that had cost more than most cars, and it was covered in bright crayon drawings, houses, suns, stick figures holding hands. Ethan felt a strange tightening in his chest as his eyes traced the mess. Near the piano stood Mrs. Alvarez, his housekeeper of 7 years. She was smiling, actually smiling, not the polite expression she wore when he passed her in the halls. One child was pressing piano keys experimentally, producing uneven notes that would have driven Ethan crazy on any other day. Another child clapped in delight every time a sound came out even remotely musical. Ethan didn't move. This wasn't just unexpected. It was impossible. His mind searched for anger, for outrage at the violation of his space, his rules. He had built his life on control, on predictability. No one entered his home without permission. No one changed the order of things. And yet, as he stood there watching, the anger never came. Instead, confusion washed over him. The children looked comfortable, safe. One little girl had curled up on the couch with a blanket, his blanket, her head resting against the armrest as if she belonged there. A boy near the windows was gazing out at the garden with open wonder, his nose almost pressed to the glass. Ethan swallowed. When was the last time anyone had looked at his home like that? He took a step forward. The floor creaked slightly beneath his weight. The laughter stopped. One by one, the children turned toward him. Their expressions shifted instantly, from joy to uncertainty, from freedom to fear. Mrs. Alvarez followed their gaze, and when she saw Ethan standing there, her face drained of color. "Mr. Vale," she whispered. The room fell into complete silence. Even the piano keys stilled under the small fingers resting on them. Ethan felt every eye on him. He was suddenly acutely aware of how he must look. expensive suit, rigid posture, a stranger in his own house. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. His gaze moved slowly around the room. The drawings, the backpacks by the wall, the scuffed shoes. These weren't careless intrusions. They were signs of people who carried their lives with them, people who didn't have the luxury of leaving things behind. He looked back at Mrs. Alvarez. She straightened, bracing herself. "I can explain," she said quickly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. His thoughts felt scattered, like glass pieces that refused to fit together. He had arrived home early expecting silence, isolation, the familiar emptiness. Instead, he had walked into something alive. He took another step into the room. No one moved. "What?" he said slowly, his voice quieter than he intended, "is going on here?" Mrs. Alvarez took a breath, and Ethan sensed that whatever answer was coming would change something, though he didn't yet understand what, or how. Mrs. Alvarez held her breath as Ethan's question hung in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. The children stood frozen, some clutching their backpacks, others gripping crayons like they might be taken away at any second. The silence felt heavier than the marble walls themselves. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vale," Mrs. Alvarez said at last, her voice unsteady but firm. "I should have asked. I know the rules." Ethan didn't respond right away. He took a few steps farther into the room, the sound of his shoes echoing faintly. He noticed how the children instinctively drew closer together, forming a small cluster, as if they had learned from experience that adults with authority could change everything with a single word. "Start from the beginning," he said. Mrs. Alvarez nodded, swallowing hard. "The shelter on Pine Street, the one near the old bakery, it lost power this afternoon. A transformer blew, and they said repairs could take all night. It's cold, and they couldn't keep the children there after dark." She hesitated, glancing at the kids. "I volunteer there sometimes. I couldn't just leave them." One of the children, a boy with messy hair and a jacket that looked too thin for winter, looked up at Ethan. His eyes were wide but curious, not hostile. That look unsettled Ethan more than fear would have. "So you brought them here," Ethan said. "Yes, Mrs. Alvarez replied softly. "I knew you wouldn't be home until late. I thought it would only be for a few hours." Ethan exhaled slowly. His eyes traveled around the room again, but this time he noticed different things. The way the children sat carefully, as if afraid to take up too much space. How none of them touched the walls or the art. How they treated the room like borrowed ground. "How many are there?" he asked. "6, she answered. "The youngest is 5. A small girl near the couch shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She watched Ethan with serious eyes, studying him as if trying to decide whether he was dangerous. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. "And their parents?" he asked. Mrs. Alvarez shook her head. "Some don't have any. Others are struggling." That single word carried weight. Ethan understood struggling in numbers, in markets, in risk. He had never thought about it in terms of children waiting out a cold night. He walked toward the piano. The child who had been pressing the keys pulled his hands back immediately, standing up straight. "It's okay," Ethan said instinctively, surprising himself with how gentle his voice sounded. "You didn't break it." The boy nodded but didn't sit back down. Ethan rested a hand lightly on the piano lid. He remembered learning to play as a child, before his parents' ambitions had crowded out lessons and warmth. The piano had become decoration long ago, untouched and perfect. Now it bore faint smudges from small fingers. Instead of annoyance, he felt relief. "Did you feed them?" Ethan asked. "Yes, Mrs. Alvarez said quickly. "Soup and bread. Nothing messy. I cleaned everything." Ethan almost smiled at the way she rushed to reassure him. Almost. He turned to face the group. "What are your names?" The children glanced at one another, unsure if they were allowed to answer. Mrs. Alvarez nodded encouragingly. "I'm Mateo," the boy near the piano said. "Lena," said the girl with the blanket. One by one, they spoke, their voices soft but clear. Ethan listened, committing each name to memory without knowing why. When they finished, the room fell quiet again. Ethan stood there, surrounded by a life he had never planned for. He thought of the meetings he'd skipped, the empty dinners he'd endured, the way his house usually greeted him with nothing but echoes. He realized something then, with startling clarity. If he told them to leave, the house would return to silence. And that silence would be louder than any laughter. Mrs. Alvarez braced herself. "I understand if you're angry," she said. "I'll take responsibility. Just Please don't blame the children. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. She had kept his life running smoothly for years, had seen him at his worst and his most distracted, had never once overstepped, until now. You're not fired, he said. She blinked. I'm not. No, Ethan said, but you did put me in a difficult position. Her shoulders sagged, relief flooding her expression. Thank you. Ethan crouched down so he was at eye level with the children. The movement felt awkward, unfamiliar, but necessary. You're safe here, he said. No one is in trouble. Lena's grip on the blanket loosened. Mateo let out a breath he'd been holding. How long until the shelter has power again? Ethan asked, standing. They said possibly tomorrow morning, Mrs. Alvarez replied. Then they can stay the night, Ethan said. The words left his mouth before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, they felt right. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Vale, I have guest rooms, he continued, as if convincing himself. Rooms that no one uses. The children stared at him, stunned. You mean, sleep here? Mateo asked. Yes, Ethan said. Sleep, eat, stay warm. A slow smile spread across the boy's face. Then across the others, cautious at first, then bright. The room changed instantly. The air felt lighter. Hope crept in quietly, like a guest who didn't want to disturb the peace. Mrs. Alvarez wiped her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Ethan shook his head. You already did. You reminded me what this house is missing. Later that night, as the children were settled into beds far too big for them, Ethan stood alone in the hallway. The mansion no longer felt vast and empty. It felt full, of footsteps, of whispered conversations, of possibility. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the night. He welcomed it.